Well, here we are, believe it or not. We are week 7, meaning we are less than 2 full weeks away from the end of this term. So we've got a couple of big assignments that are coming up that are due. And I'm going to post a video probably tomorrow. And I will talk more about your final 2 assignments, right? The vocational profile and plan, and then also the organizational development, career development consulting project that you're working on with your groups, okay? So I want to just really briefly touch on a couple of things, where we're headed this unit, where we were, and then, of course, where we're headed for next unit, and then we're done. So my hope is, my prayer is, my thought is, my desire is for this class to have been something that was very introspective, right? Okay, I'm going to take some time, I'm going to prayerfully consider my future, what I'm doing now, where I'm headed, what it is that God might be calling me to do. You know, even that terminology, I think sometimes we misuse, or maybe not misuse, but we maybe misunderstand what really is being said when we say things like, what is God calling me to do? Right? For those of us who would say, I'm a follower of Jesus, God is calling us to be a number of things, and I think sometimes we put our hopes, we pin our hopes and our desires and our dreams on Him calling us to do something specific. And I would argue that He is calling us to be something specific, to be a follower of Jesus, to be a person of our word, to be someone who is an example of Him, and to be the things that He has wired us to be, no matter what it is that we are currently doing. So I think we want to rephrase that. We want to reframe that, if you will, how we think about calling. I think I've mentioned this before, but this idea that there's one calling that shows up in multiple expressions. And so as you think about what do you want to do, where do you want to go, what, even if you're using that phrase calling, what are those things? I mean, there's nothing wrong with planning, with dreaming. I think there's something wrong with following our heart, especially if we look in the Old Testament where it says that our heart is wicked and deceitful of all things. How can we trust something that is wicked and deceitful? But I do think that we still have interests, we have desires, we have things that we're passionate about doing. And I think that we should definitely pursue those things. And so maybe for you in this class, you've given thought and you're thinking about the future, and you realize I really love what I do. I mean, it's just a lot of fun. It's just fantastic. It gives me an opportunity to make a difference in the world, to bring about redemption and the brokenness that I'm surrounded by all the time. I want to stay doing this. And maybe some of you had said, I really wish that I could do fill in the blank. Maybe you have had a completely kind of epiphanous, if that's even a word, but epiphanies throughout the term where you go, man, I can't even believe that I never thought about that. Keller, or whoever it was that wrote these books, helped you to think about something in maybe a different way. I heard from some students last week that you really enjoyed the Keller conversation that you were able to have in the book review. So I hope that was the case. I hope that was enjoyable. Keller concludes, and I think that, again, as I've mentioned before, that's just one of the most important books in this space. So there's a lot of discussion and conversation and questions and assignments about that book, I think, because it really helps to reframe and rethink why we do what we do and how we do it. He's the individual that would say that oftentimes he believes that the very reason we want to quit our job is potentially the very reason that God wants us to stay at our job. And that's not a popular idea, and yet we're so quick, especially I would say probably a younger generation. It's not to be stereotypical, but my dad, he's a baby boomer, and he was at the same organization for 33 years, worked for a county doing the same work for 34 years. I worked at APU full-time for 12 and a half years and had 8 different jobs. I mean, I've been all over the place. I worked since I was 15 years old, and I probably had a total of, close to 20-something jobs in my entire lifetime. And so, I think just this way of holding the same job for so many years is just no longer a thing that's going to happen. That said, I do think that at the same time, kind of on the flip side of that reality, is we leave jobs too soon. We're not ready. We're not prepared. We're not sticking around to see things through. And so all of a sudden we up and leave because we think we're going to turn, the corner and get to something bigger and better. And I'm of the mindset that we need to really think deeply about why we want to leave and if that's actually the right reason for us to do that. And if perhaps maybe we should stick around. So I hope that this course has kind of jumbled, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but really in a positive kind of shaking the apple cart of our minds, thinking about work and calling and vocation in different ways to perhaps even challenge you to think, man, I wonder if I've been thinking about this the right way. I've heard from a number of you, and you've asked yourselves a lot of great questions. And so anecdotally, I think that I can say that, yes, it's actually been very helpful and insightful. And I hope that even as we continue on through these next 2 weeks, that's the case as well. Okay, so great job. Really enjoying taking part in everything that you are sharing as far as the things you're learning. Again, my hope would be that you have found that the design of a class like this that really has been very, very strategically placed and pieced together to help your learning. This smorgasbord, right? This buffet, this feast laid before you of incredible learning along these ideas. I hope that's been just that for you. One of the other things I want to mention about calling is calling is a word that's tossed around, and I would say especially in Christian organizations and cultures, right? So churches and parachurch organizations and faith-based institutions like APU and other places. But really, if you think about it, calling in those terms is a bit subjective. Because what if I were to say to you, I believe that I am called to this? And you were to say, that's interesting because I don't think so. Or maybe you were to say, or I was to say to you, I believe that you are called to do this. And you say, I don't think so. Then my question is, if we're going to use that really strong calling language, who has missed it, right? Who has heard from, if you want to use even kind of a calling from God, who has heard incorrectly from God? Or who hasn't heard what's correct, what's right in the eyes and the mind of the Lord, right? So am I missing something? Are you missing something? And so when we use that language, you've heard people say, I believe I'm called to marry you, or I believe I'm called to be a pastor, I believe I'm called to work at this church or this organization. What if the other person or the other party doesn't reciprocate that? I don't think so. So I think that's another reason why this idea of calling is a bit challenging. But I think there's a deeper, more insightful, more thoughtful way for us to consider calling, and that would, like I said earlier, one calling, we're called to be something that shows up in perhaps even different, somewhat different ways, no matter where it is that we are working in the different organizations and different cultures that we're part of. So I hope that's been something that's been insightful and helpful, and I hope that the texts we've read have kind of helped to reinforce those realities for us. All right, so where are we headed this week? This week we're going to look at motivation at work. We'll do our discussion there. We've got a discussion 3-2-1 wrap-up. There's a core values inventory, and then you have the Bridges book review that's due. The Bridges book is a really simple, straightforward, quick read. So if you haven't started reading that, you've got plenty of time to get that done, and I think you'll be just fine on that. I hope you'll find it enjoyable. This is a course that I've tweaked a number of different ways over the years, but really I've got a lot of credit to owe to Dr. Paul Cack, who helped to create a lot of the curriculum that you see in this course. And he's been a huge, how would I say this, just a huge mentor of mine over the years as far as my teaching, the way that I think, the depth at which I hope to think and communicate when it comes to topics like this especially. He and I have co-taught together a number of courses on vocation, on calling, and so he's really helped to influence the way that I think about this. And I find the books that we're looking at in this class to be just incredibly important. The conversations as well, the multimedia, the videos, right? So when you get into the multimedia, I'm excited about what we're going to view this week. Dan Pink's got a great TED Talk on the puzzle of motivation. And I love Dan Ariely. If you've ever read any of his stuff, he's got a great book. His first one actually came out called The Predictably Irrational, where he just talks about the irrationality of human beings and how it's just predictable that we will be irrational. He has a follow-up book called The Upside of Irrationality, and then he has a book called The Honest Truth About Lying. He is decently smart with 2 PhDs. I believe they're both from Duke. One in either Duke or Yale. Tomatoes, right? So one is in psychology and one is economics. He's got a great story. You'll hear his very thick accent. He was involved in a terrible accident where part of his body was burned. So if you actually see his face only on half of his face can he grow facial hair, and the other half he can't because I guess the follicles and all of that were burned off in the fire. So an amazing story, amazing thinker, one of my favorite authors and intellectual heroes of mine. So I hope you'll enjoy those videos. And then we have some conversation to have. So what motivates you at work? Why is money not necessarily the motivator that many think it is? What role do you think motivation or lack thereof plays in employees feeling that their work is meaningless? How can the idea of vocation and calling be used to motivate employees? And does understanding one's vocation in a changing world influence one's motivation at work, or does motivation at work influence one's understanding of vocation? You know, I was asked a while back when I was teaching this class, what does the title of this course mean? Understanding vocation in a changing world. And I thought that was a great question to be asked. What does that mean? What are we getting at with that? And I think you can look at it just on its face, right? We need to understand what vocation looks like and means in the midst of a rapidly changing reality from the world standpoint, right? So things are changing so quickly, and even more, you know, when I started teaching this class, it's so different today than it was then, even 5, 6, 7 years ago. As we talk about artificial intelligence and you know, how so many jobs are going away. And then if you think about the fact that there's all of these quote unquote blue collar jobs that are out there that are paying just gobs of money, but no one wants because they see it as beneath them, we need to radically change and think differently about how we view vocation in a radically changing world. I think that many of us might have even come into this class, or maybe in the years past, and have thought that work, just the idea of work, is a result of the fall, right? So the original sin came into the world with Adam and Eve, and because of the fall of man, we are experiencing work. Well, that's not the case at all, because God worked as He created the world. Adam and Eve were working as they were naming animals, right? So they were doing the work. They were tending the garden. Work is part and parcel. It's God's good invention, and yet it was sin that came and tainted work. And so we need to, again, radically rethink the way that we view and consider work in and of itself as being good or bad. And I would argue that work is very, very good, and it helps us to feel fulfilled, to have purpose. And I think that when we sometimes don't feel good or feel like we have purpose or fulfillment in our work, there's a number of questions that we need to ask, and hopefully throughout the course of this class, we've been able to ask and answer some of those questions. Okay, so we'll go from that discussion to the 3-2-1. So similar to what we've done the last couple of weeks, I guess the last 6 weeks. So I want to hear from you on that. You're asking some great questions, so thanks for that. And then as I mentioned, the core values inventory, there's a link. So when you actually go into Module 7, you'll see a link to the core values inventory. Complete that and then just submit how you responded to that with an upload of a document. Okay. And then your Bridges book report, or review, not report, but review is due. And you've got directions and instructions on how to do that. It should be at least 2 pages, but no more than 4. Your feedback on your books that you've read so far has been great. And then your vocational profile and plan. It's not due until the end of next week on Friday at midnight, but this is just, again, a reminder that that's due. And then you have your organizational career development group project that is due by the end of, I guess, the middle of next week. Okay, so again, it's due on Wednesday of next week, but I'm going to allow you to turn it in all the way up until midnight on Friday. And there's a quick video that gives you an overview of the assignment itself. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in my next video about that assignment. I've already done that, but I will hit on a couple of questions that I've had from students regarding the videos and how do you get both voices in the presentation and so forth, and we'll talk about that. So if you have specific questions on anything that pertains to your group individually, please reach out to me, and as many have done already, email me and then copy whoever it is that's your group member on the email, and we'll go from there. All right. I have not heard from anybody that there's issues with communication, so I'm assuming that all is well there. But if I can help in any way, please let me know. Have a great week 7, and I look forward to, again, seeing you online.